V druhé části dnešní sekce, kterou jsem nazval Vize budoucnosti, ve které se chci zaměřit na vzdělávání. A nejenom na budoucnost vzdělávání, ale i na budoucnost práce s lidmi, práce s informacemi, komunikace, možnosti, jak právě komunikace ovlivňuje naši společnost a vývoj naší společnosti. A protože v této druhé sekci jsem přizval zahraničního hosta, tak jsme se domluvili, že budu hovořit anglicky se svými hosty, oběma. Takže doufám, že tady je možnost nějakého simultánního překladu, pokud by někdo z vás nerozuměl. A dovolím se tedy přejít do angličtiny. The first person I would like to invite is John Moravec, who is, please John, come to me and take a place. I believe that John will introduce after a while himself, but what I know about John, he's really interested in knowledge. He calls himself nomad, which is a very interesting word, innovation itself. So I believe that John will, in the beginning, introduce who is he. And the second guest who will be joining our session is Daniel Prokop, very well known person. We know Daniel from the company Median, but what I'm very much interested about his view on the future, because he wrote also 3 books. One of the books, Slepé skvrny, was very popular. He was talking about the disbalance in education, the risks for the future coming in the community when we are working with misinformation about democracy development. So, gentlemen, please sit down, because we will be discussing approximately 45 minutes the future of education, the future of work. So first, I would like to ask John if you can introduce yourself quickly. Then I ask Daniel.
Yeah. Well, so thank you for the introduction, and it's kind of weird introducing myself because we're just having a conversation here, so I'm not even sure what to say to introduce myself. But I'm John Moravec. I first came to this country 30 years ago this summer. Actually, it was interesting. I was a nerd, a nerdy kid, super skinny nerdy kid. I thought I was going to have an IT career, maybe work in the sky building Siri. But no, I landed at Ruzinia. There are guys there greeting me with AK-47s. Everything was so old because it was the last year of ČSFR. And I got shipped on a bus to Bardejov. Poznáte to? To je strašně východní Slovensko. Strašně daleko. And konec světu. And it was a really interesting time because I studied at the gymnasium v Bardejově. And the culture, the structure, the control that I think maybe we'll talk a little bit here today was very apparent. And it made me realize similar things within my own system, this sort of intercultural experience. So I went really from being this nerdy technical kid to something that's really interested in human systems. Because as humans, we're so much more complex. There's so many more mysteries. So I went on more school, then I got a PhD, and became an education futurist. So it means I'm not just curious about the future of education, but the jobs that we need to have in the future, and then what we need to train for. And that's really been driving my thinking.
Thank you. And then I would like to ask also Daniel to introduce quickly himself.
So in terms of education and the future, I focus mostly on inequalities in education, meaning inequality in educational opportunity, how it's being described in the US and England, and the fact that in Czech Republic, your chances in education is very, very structured by and determined where you were born and in which family you are born and so on. So in our company, which is called PATŘÍ Research, we are focusing on this issue and we are trying to describe it and provide some data. What are the causes of this problem in Czech Republic, which I think very much influence the very topic of our talk, because to be a successful dreamer, nerd, and creative person, you need to have some chance to develop yourself early on in the education, and we lose quite a lot of talents in very early stages of education. So that's what we focus on in education, and I co-wrote the strategy 2030, the part about the inequalities. And we try to do many interactive projects, which you might know, like mapa vzdělávání CZ, where you can find the data about your region in terms of education and social problems. And also we focus on social problems which are very much connected with the education in Czech Republic. But because I have this new project, new company, I have many colleagues which are focused more on the content of education and more on the topics which John, I think, talks about a lot. So I think it fits well.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, it's very interesting word, nomad, which you created, in fact, for your profile. I know who are nomads, which is basically people migrating. And I met a lot of nomads in the northern part of Russia, for example, who have a certain style of living. But I would be very much interested if you can introduce what do you mean with nomad and what you are really interested, what is your subject, what you would like to share with all of us.
No, dobře. So nomads is an idea that kind of came to me about 20 years ago. Just really trying to project what the future of work is going to be. And I think that in this city, I think people saw it, that if you're going to grow up you're training to become a steel worker, you're expected to have a job as a steel worker and retire as a steel worker, have a pension, all this stuff. Or for teachers or whatever roles you have. But the world was changing so much, industries are disappearing, new jobs are being created, that there's a real need for sort of mobility. Mobility in the kind of work that we take on. And so in towns where the industrial complex shuts down, people are forced to do that. Now, a nomad is a knowledge nomad. So it's a person, creative person who can work with just about anybody, anytime, and anywhere. Right? So we all have individual knowledge. This all stems from our individual experiences, right? We can go to the same school, we can still take the same courses, but we come out knowing different things. And this individual level knowledge is what makes us unique and helps us create value as we traverse through different roles or gigs. So they're really context workers. So it's really asking what sort of value can I add into a conversation that we're having now. And if you're in a position where you could possibly be replaced by technology or by other people replicating what you do, it's usually time to move on and add new value to another organization. And that's really the rope behind the nomad thing. But I also saw on the program brochure that somebody wrote down a nomad is somebody who's mad about knowledge, right? They love learning. And I think that's also correct. That's not my definition, but I really like that because it really reflects that learning doesn't stop and end at certain times in our life. We're always continuing to learn, we're always continuing to grow, and I think that a huge part of this is finding ways to make this visible for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining this interesting word. Maybe Daniel, you said that the education very much depends also on where we were born, in which family, that we have different access. I have experiences with several educational systems. In 1992, that's exactly 30 years ago, I finalized the Technical University in Brno, here in the Czech Republic. Then I started business and I understood that I don't understand at all the finance. So I went to the United States, to the university in Chicago, and I did my MBA there. And I arrived to Chicago and I was very much surprised because there was a completely different educational concept. It was like teaching a child to swim. When I was a very young child, they just throw me to the water and swim. And I didn't get any preparation, nothing. And it was like in the United States, I was surprised that the professor don't tell me anything. They say you should study that first and then we can discuss and resolve a certain problem. At the Czech educational system, it was a very classical system, which was probably post-communistic, if maybe not, but we were learning a lot of text, we were learning a lot of theories, and we had to repeat those texts and memorize a lot of things. And I was really lucky because I have a possibility to memorize pictures. So I was able to scan, and I measured that even 300 pages per day, and I could memorize that for 3 days. So my exams should be in the next 3 days, otherwise I don't manage. So that was my experience between the differences in different educational systems. What do you think about the Czech system now, Daniel? How do you see the pros and cons and where we should go?
Well, you touched a very interesting topic, which we might discuss, and the topic of knowledge. I think when you hear this talks about changing education, you know, it's all very often focused on that there's too much facts, too much knowledge, and we should focus on competencies and other issues and so on. I partly agree with that, although many research from abroad shows that the knowledge is actually important, but it's not knowledge how we teach it. It's not thousands of particle facts. It's knowledge which you have deeply in your deep memory or long-term memory, and you can connect it with another parts of knowledge. And this type of knowledge, according to many researchers, actually allows you to teach more, to have critical thinking. So knowledge and facts are, I don't think they are in opposition to critical thinking and so on, which I think sometimes it's interpreted like that in the Czech education field, that there is some, you know, opposition of the facts, knowledge, and critical thinking and so on. I think some well-rooted knowledge and which is rooted in the context is necessary for critical thinking and so on. But Czech education quite often focus on the amount of the knowledge and, as you said, the memorizing and so on. And as I understood, your experience was from University of Chicago, from the, you know, and I think one of the problems of Czech education is that on the university level, I think it should be, like you say, you know, there should be more independence. There should be, I think we should focus on the on some results, you know, and so on. Because Czech universities sometimes they kind of they are financed by the student, you know, so they don't focus on the results so much. But we have very selective and very, let's say, elitist schooling before that. So I think the problem of Czech education is that we kind of sort kids and, you know, focus on their results very early on. We have a lot of high-stakes tests which divide them and so on. We get these kids through different education lanes. One of them is fast, one of them is slower and worse, and we connect them together on the university. And what you see is that the kids who goes through the worse education lanes, they don't go to gymnasiums. I mean, they don't go to general high schools. They go to some specialized high schools. They have much higher probability that they will fail on the universities. So we have a system which is very selective, very elitist on the beginning, and then it kind of like resigns on the results in a phase where I think we should be much more oriented on like getting the best from the people and so on. You know? So that's, and sometimes we think this is effective, you know, to sort the kids and be selective on very early on and then connect it together at the end, you know. And I think it's an absurd idea which would never work in any business, you know. It should be a funnel. It should be a funnel, but we do the funnel on the beginning. We kill the potentials on the beginning, and then we don't have enough base to build the enough, you know, on the final stages. And this is a metaphor, but I think this is a problem in many fields in Czech Republic. This early selectivity, you know, and when you focus on things like ice hockey, you know, it's also harmed by the lack of the basis from which you can build the elite, you know. So I think, to sum it up, we are in society where we need more than 10-15% of very educated people, and who cares about the rest, you know. We need general education for as much people as possible, because we don't know what will happen in 20 years, as John said. And Czech education is not prepared for this, because it's prepared for the society where you have 10-15% of highly educated people, and then the rest is kind of limited by early stage of the education. And I think to do this second transformation of the economy which we talk about, we have to change this approach and try to get as much from the kids when we can, which means in preschool, in primary school, and so on.
Okay, it was interesting because I have one experience from the business practice here in the Czech Republic. I was looking for new employees among students at the medium technical school not far from here in Opava, and I could hear one entrepreneur screaming on the teacher, and he's telling to the teacher, please don't teach these students programming because there will be very expensive workers. And I was just looking at it, but that's basically another subject. But I would like to ask you, John, what do you see as the biggest challenge of today? Because we are in the technology era. The technologies are influencing our lives. We are living in dual system. That means we have digital world, we have exponentially growing technologies, and even, let's say, the operators, the workers need high qualifications, much higher than 30, 20 years ago. So we need to change something. What do you think is the biggest challenge, not only in the Czech Republic, but globally, because these technologies are spread globally?
Well, I think you really, with your example, I think you really tapped onto it. I think there's a real need for critical thinking, that you're able to push logic like that. It's like the cigarette agency telling Parliament you could save money in healthcare expenses, but if everybody smoked and died early. Like, it's just ridiculous thinking that really cuts out in critical thinking. And these are, part of a broader set of skills that over the last 10 years really called 21st century skills. And it's not so much about hard knowledge, but a lot more about the soft knowledge, or having the capability to learn continuously. And so I think what we need to do is find ways to empower each other to learn continuously, but also respond back in ways where we can communicate effectively, where you don't have one crazy person hijacking a conversation, where we can engage in civil discourse, civil society, where we can work with our ideas in context. And that requires a higher level of thinking. And so much of the formal education system is really built to prevent that. Maybe not on purpose, but at least on accident.
You mean even in the US?
Even in the U.S. In the Czech Republic, kids have to decide what they want to be when they're 14 years old, right? And you take a test to decide what you want to be. And then you're told either you can do that or you can't do something. It's always you can't. So you're filtered through. United States, it's a little more general, but still you need to figure out what you want to do by the time you hit university or you start working. The opportunities to improve are a lot less. Now, one of the things that we do very well in the United States, though, is that everybody always has a second chance. So if you screw up in school, there's always a second chance to find another way to build academic skills that are either recognized or not recognized too. So that's a nice thing, but we can improve a whole lot more.
Maybe one question to Daniel. We are talking about inequalities. Well, it's probably normal in the United States that there are very big differences between rich people and poor people. What we can see, especially during the last years, that the number of really poor people in Central Europe and also in Czech Republic is growing, because a lot of people are not able, let's say, to enter the newly changed world. A lot of small businesses and also a lot of people were thinking really that they will be steel worker till the end of the life, but now they have to re-qualify 2-3 times per life. That means this permanent lifelong learning system is in place. But what do you think, Daniel, what we should do in order to really involve also these people who are getting out of the, let's say, mainstream and becoming poorer and poorer, and of course they create also danger for the democracy and social, let's say, peace? So
first of all, my wife is from the US, from Ohio, and so we have some friends there. It's a very poor city from Ohio, and I have a friend who is very successful dentist, and she grew up in trailer park, you know. And you can think about it. Do you know anybody who will be successful dentist or doctor or something, and grew up in a trailer park or thing like that in Czech Republic? I don't know anybody like that, and I don't know anybody who knows anybody like that. So it tells you something about the Czech education system. This girl, she went to normal, good elementary school, normal middle school, normal high school, you know, and she kept in touch with the middle class. In Czech Republic, she will be on the sideline from the very beginning, you know. So I think up to high school, the American education system is more equal than Czech one. Then it starts, you know, the selection by the high costs of the universities and so on, as you said. But what we should do, I think I don't have any illusions that these people can be requalified. Some of them can be requalified to be IT experts, but it's dozens maybe, you know. So I think your opinion would be interesting. I think we need some new industries in these regions. Like the Germans, you know, they invest in green industries in Saxon and so on. So we need some new types of jobs for these people in the regions where the coal and the industry is fading and so on. And maybe part of them can requalify to work in the IT or in services and so on. But it doesn't happen in 10 years, this change, you know. And then we have to change the education. I think there should be much more and of course high quality general high school education. In some regions, only 30% of kids goes to the grammar schools. Majority of them goes to highly specialized schools, and they are learning jobs which might not exist in 20, 30 years. And so I think it should be more the knowledge which they get on the high schools. It might be the grammar schools, it might be the technical schools. It should be more general. And from my perspective, from my company or research company, it's much more valuable if they know, well, let's say Microsoft Excel, than some special skills, you know, because these general things you use everywhere, you know. And I think it might be similar in some other fields, you know, that there are some general skills which help you develop yourself and be able to learn more and change your careers and so on. So the over-specialization of Czech upper secondary education, which means učiliště and střední odborné školy, I think is a problem and we have to change it. And it has many impacts, like it's my last point, one of the impact that there is not enough places in the good grammar schools, in the čtyřletá gymnázia, is that many parents want to enter these 8 years grammar schools and get kids from the normal schools because it's kind of like first chance which gives you certainty that you go to university. So why don't you use this like first chance if there is limited access than in the 9th grade, you know? So I think what we need to do is do very, very broader and chances for good quality of the general upper secondary education.
John, can you add?
I just want to add on real quick. Because we get into what Daniel was talking about, and the real challenge with kids who are poor, challenged by socioeconomic status. I think that our approach in education, globally, whether it's from various ministries, down to international organizations within the UN system, et cetera, that are working on improving education for the disadvantaged or girls' education in some of the world's poorest countries. We try to control a conversation. We try to control what they're doing. And the big reason is because we're using public money, right? And there needs to be accountability. We have to ask the question, well, are they learning? Right? And so we wind up controlling the education process just so we can measure at the very end if we think that we're spending their money wisely. So we're not really measuring what kids know, we're measuring how well kids can answer a test in many cases. And this doesn't attend to this individual level knowledge creation where we just really need to allow kids to learn, right? kids, and especially in the Czech Republic, aren't afforded agency, right? It's very hierarchical, top down, and agency is being allowed to do what you want to do, in a way, or the system supports you to go off and learn. And the other aspect, I think, would be self-efficacy, which is really believing in yourself that you can do it, right? So I think that when you have high agency, high self-efficacy, we kind of hit this nirvana point, right? Where kids are supported, kids are learning, but too often we have very low agency. In the United States, we have low agency too, but for whatever reason, I think it's a cultural reason, we have a high level of self-efficacy. That is, kids learn despite their schooling, right? They find the ways to do things and make it visible and create new opportunities from it.
That's interesting. You mentioned that we need some new industries in order to change also the educational system. I think it's kind of chicken-egg story at this moment, because I do believe that the Czech industries, and I don't mean just the industry but also the services sector, is influencing the educational system as well. I mentioned one example of the businessman who doesn't want to have highly qualified people because it's too expensive at the end. But that's probably a problem of the structure of our industry, because we have a lot of assembling lines, we have a lot of small added value production lines, we are producing spare parts for the global corporations, but we have no final or very limited number of final products with very high added value. So this business leaders, they push also the educational system in order to have what I call the people who are able to push the green or red button, but not to have really the knowledge, which at the end will be replaced by robots or autonomous systems. So I'm not saying that everybody is doing that, because we have a lot of businesses who are starting their own schools because they are not satisfied with the Czech state system, let's say. But I still feel that it's like a chicken-egg story, that both sides, or maybe three sides, need to have the same goal, to change the system. It starts with mothers. It starts with, because mothers are influencing the future education in the Czech Republic of their kids the most. Then it's friends, then it's maybe also other family members. But it also is influenced by the local community, because the local politicians, they decide where to put the money into the educational system, because Czech educational system is fully publicly paid. It's free of charge, mostly. There are some private schools. But it also starts from businesses, because we as business people, we need to recognize that we need to invest into education as well. We talk maybe now for 30 years about so-called dual systems, so that the children, they are learning in companies, they are learning in jobs, on-the-job learning. But if you start to talk with business people how much you are willing to invest into this system, you find very little number of people who are willing to put their money, because they say it should be paid by the government, but the government is not able to arrange this new system. So if I look at this globalization and deglobalization, localization of economy on the global level, I think we should also ask, John, how do you see the change in your system? Because the technological leaders like Google, like Facebook, like all these other high-tech companies and the giants influencing the global digital economy are in the United States very often. It's not only the Silicon Valley, it's also the other states in the States. But how did this wave of technology firms change the educational system in your country? Because we are now, let's say, feeling the same wave of new digital economy coming to our, let's say, also Ostrava region. How did it change your educational system?
Oh boy, honestly, I don't think anything's really changed. I think we talk about change a whole lot more. I think we have more of a vocabulary of talking about change. We talk about science, technology, and engineering, arts, and mathematics. But when you ask, and everybody's like, well, who's against that, right? It's like saying, who doesn't like creativity, right? But the question really should be, what do we need to do differently that we're not already doing? And this is where everybody's falling short in answers. Now, these tech companies, because we're not producing the talent that they need or enough of it, they're importing people. I mean, we're a country of immigrants. but they're bringing people on consulting contracts from India or South Asia to come and work at these companies and do highly technical work. And I'm sure they pay less or whatever, but it's really interesting that we can't find our own talent to be able to lead that. But on the other hand, though, kids are coming out and taking on different roles outside of the tech stuff, more in the service sector, across the various services, the experience economy, working to build that stuff. So doing a lot of the conceptual work around it, but not doing the hard tech work. And it's a very interesting situation that we're in.
Thank you. There was one word very interesting for me, creativity. That's, I think, something where we have a lot of potential in the Czech educational system. What do you think, Daniel?
You mean potential to increase it, right? I agree with John that the problem of Czech education is lack of some kind of lack of autonomy and self-efficacy, and the testing you talked about. I'm not against some low-stakes testing, you know, to see how the schools are coping and so on. But we have high-stakes tests which are used to kind of shape the ways to education, and we don't even have any data from that because we don't collect data about, you know, the students' social background. So we can't use these testing by Cermat and by, you know, the maturity and so on. We cannot even use it to change the education system and to kind of analyze, you know, what are the problems and so on. So that's even more absurd than in the US, I think, that the quality of the tests is worse than SATs and ACTs. But we don't even collect this data to use these, you know, to use them to improve the education system, you know. So that's quite horrible. Creativity, I think there should be more space in the Czech curriculum because it's very overwhelmed especially in the in the middle school. So there should be more space in the curriculum and more space for creativity already, you know. And I think the more important than to reduce the curriculum, which is the main topic in Czech discussion, is to have some story behind each subject. So, for example, in Finland, the chemistry, as far as I know, is taught on the topics, you know. So you are learning about climate change, and you are learning how the carbon things works, you know, on this subject. You are learning about body, and you are learning the chemical things on the real issues. And I think it's more important to find the stories behind the subjects, which actually make sense and can support this creativity. And it's more, and I think you can have the hard knowledge behind that. And it will work even with the hard knowledge, but there has to be the story behind each subject to kind of make some sense of it, you know. And then it allows for creativity much more than if you just overwhelm it with the hard knowledge without the story, you know.
Thank you. We are talking about the system. We are talking about the feedback from the data, which we are missing in the Czech system. But we didn't talk too much about the competencies of the teachers of the future. So maybe, John, can you say your view on the competencies of teachers? Because I think this is a very important part of the system, the teacher itself.
You know, in every country, the required competencies are different. So in some countries, they're just hoping teachers show up for work, right? That's like the first one, show up. But I think this is where it gets really difficult, because the competencies that teachers need are the same ones that students need to develop, to be able to be creative, to be able to contextualize knowledge, to be able to work across disciplines. And you know what? This is a lot of work, because you are in front of kids, you're doing instruction or co-instruction, cooperative activities, whatever. It takes a lot of work, a lot of energy. So what we need are some support systems so that teachers can do their job better, whether it's through technologies or with aides in the classroom, or with teachers and students co-creating together. But I think that we need to open up some spaces for experimentation with that and just really see what happens. And what we really need to focus on then is facilitating the process and not being so concerned about the outcomes. Because otherwise we're all competing to see who looks best on the OECD PISA scores, and it's like competing and being the best looking kid in an ugly family, right? I mean, it's like, well, what can we produce that goes beyond that? Because as Daniel is saying, that measurement part shouldn't be your focus. That's an accountability piece or finance. But really though, what can we create and how can we celebrate it?
Okay, Daniel, what do you think about the future profile of the teacher, about the competencies of Czech teachers in the future?
You see, I'm even like a little bit more skeptical than John. I'm a little bit more conservative in terms of education. So I think the PISA is actually quite okay. And you see from the PISA tests, which are focused on some functional literacies, that Czech kids, even the Czech kids who have like A's, you know, and so on the in the schools, they fail in these tests of the functional literacy, you know. And you see that the grades in Czech schools are, there's a new study which shows that 25% of the kids who have C's, trojky, in school, in math, are actually better in math in PISA when you have to use it in some actual problems than 25% of the kids who have A's at schools, you know. So this grading system in Czech Republic is even a little bit worse than the PISA, and it actually shows, the study by IDEA, that it kind of kills the self-efficacy if you are graded worse than is your abilities and so on. That's interesting. There's another level of this influence of overgrading and over-testing in within Czech schools. It's not only about the PISA, but there's so many tests which kind of there's so many tests, and so and I'm getting back to your questions. I think if, the teachers should maybe focus less on the testing and focus more on getting feedback from the students if they actually got the content within the class itself, you know. The early feedback, to kind of do the follow-up and to allow the more students to catch up and so on, you know. So that's one thing, to have this responsive and formative teaching, which I think can be done in quite traditional ways. It doesn't have to be only, you know, destroying the frontal teaching. I think even within the frontal teaching, there could be much more responsivity and getting feedback if they got the knowledge and so on, if they actually understand it and so on. So that's one thing which I think should be changed in Czech education. And the second thing is, when you see the data like TALIS, which is a survey among teachers, you can see that the Czech teachers have very low self-efficacy in motivating kids who are not motivating from their family. And they are not taught how to teach kids which are not motivated from their families. And they lack this competence in their teaching careers. And I think we should focus on this much more on the universities. They study the teachers, and we should focus on changing this idea. When we talk with teachers, you often hear, you know, it's from the family, you know, you cannot change the family, and sometimes the family is the unit of the education in Czech Republic, and I think we should change that. It should be the kid, you know, who is the unit of the education, you know. And if he's not motivated from the family, you have to do as much as possible to change it in the school, you know. And on the positive note, I think in this region, in Moravskoslezský kraj, there's many regions where it's working much better than in some other parts of Czech Republic. So on this mapa vzdělávání.cz, you can see that many regions like Krnov and other regions from the Moravskoslezský kraj, the number of the kids who are failing in school is much lower than you would expect from the social problems in the region. In Ústecký and Karlovarský kraj, it's on the other hand much higher, the number of the people who is failing. And not only in these regions, Karlovarský is actually how it should be. You know, we have some prediction from the social problems, and Karlovarský is how it should be. Ústecký is sometimes worse, but some regions like Plzeňský kraj is much worse than it should be in the results of the kids. So on the positive note, many regions within Moravskoslezský kraj are learning and doing quite good job how to cope with these social problems. And I think one of the tools is to keep some community, you know. Sometimes it's church, sometimes it's some leisure activities, and involving these kids in leisure activities. And that's maybe one of the keys how this region, even it has some big social problems, can actually cope with them much better than some other parts of the Czech Republic.
Okay, let's say part of the system is teachers, but what I see now, it's also the technological change, and it's not only in the industry and services, but we can also use modern technologies in teaching. So what do you think as the opportunity, maybe the advanced virtual reality systems and other things? How do you see the use and the combination of new technologies to improve and maybe to individualize the educational system, as Daniel said, because there might be some slower students and maybe these technologies can help them. What's your view on the future of technologies to be used in the education?
I mean, we're using new technologies to do the same old shit, and that's the biggest problem. That we're using it to replicate bad practices. We're not using technologies to enable new practices. And that's a real challenge, I think. In the past couple of years, I've been working a lot with online learning systems, learning management systems, and they're all the same. They all have different brands, different source codes, but they all really deliver the same way. It's this top-down, watch a movie, take a test kind of thing. And it's horrible. You don't get any sort of creative interaction. Everything that you learn in there is pre-programmed. So I don't know if we're really opening opportunities for learning. We're using it for information delivery. The learning part's up to the student, but these tools right now aren't connected with building knowledge, right? And I think that one of the things that we really need to figure out is understanding the differences between data, information, knowledge, creativity, innovation, right? Because data are bits and pieces here and there which we form information. We can deliver information through Moodle or any other LMS. But knowledge building is about taking this information and creating personal meaning out of it, right? You create knowledge and you ride a bicycle, right? It's hard to communicate, that's tacit knowledge, but you get some explicit knowledge, but you combine these two forms together, you got personal knowledge. That makes us real special as individuals, right? And then we act on it, right? Through creativity, create innovations out of it, new outcomes, intentional outcomes. And I think that we really need to parse out the differences from this and really think about, as a starting point, how can we use technologies to help form knowledge? As we're just schlepping information.
Okay. Daniel, what is your view on?
Well, in the Czech Republic, I think the main thing we got from the using technology in schools is that during COVID-19 closures, we actually found out that the kids are not participating in schools because you don't see it in normal education, that they are not, paying attention, they are not actually there. And when they don't connect with their computers, you can actually see it, you have the data. And it kind of, we started to focus on this issue. So that was the main, I think, benefit of the technology, not directly education, but actually finding out that some part of the kids are actually not in the schools, But I'm not expert on the using technology in schools and so on. One thing I think is that sometimes we are focusing on some very specific type of knowledge and competence, like, let's say, the media literacy, mediální gramotnost. And in the Czech society, among the young people, it's limited by some so-called prerequisites for these type of competences. So when you have 25% of kids, it's around 25, who have very low literacy, reading literacy at age of 15. You cannot teach them good media literacy, When you cannot understand written text and make some sense of it, then you cannot be taught media literacy. So I think we should kind of get back to the proper basis and teach good reading, for example, a good reading literacy in schools. And it's the same with math. I think you cannot do some like very special things if you don't have the good basic mathematical skills. And it's not about the, you know, memorizing the functions, you know, and writing them down in the test and then forgetting about them, you know, but about real like functional literacy in these things. So I think I'm a little bit scared or afraid of the change of the curriculum, you know, which focuses on these like new competencies, you know, which seems to be modern, but they are also very special, very specialized, you know, and we are forgetting that, you know, it's 20-25% of the kids don't have good reading skills, and they cannot make some sense from the text, you know, at the age of 15. So I think we should get back to these like basic founding things in the education.
I just want to add on real quick. I think since you brought up the pandemic, this is, thankfully we've gone, what, 45 minutes into this, and nobody's mentioned pandemic yet, so I feel like we're reaching the end. But one of the changes I had to make during the pandemic was I had to shift what I do for work, and so I wound up doing a lot of consulting for a UN agency, United Nations agency. And they fund all sorts of projects around the world. But because the learning that kids are doing is not visible, they announced there's this huge learning loss. And I'm like, no, the only thing kids do is learn, right? But the difference is, are we controlling what they learn? Are we directing their attention to what to learn? And then the whole measurement question. So I think that we have to find ways to make these invisible ways that the kids learn, that we learn, and find ways to make them more visible, right? Make the education system less visible and put the kids more in the forefront.
Okay, so in fact, what you are saying, we should come to the basics.
I think the learning loss is interesting because we did only a survey which kind of tried to calculate the learning loss, you know, you would like that. And the learning loss in Czech Republic wasn't huge. It was like, you know, losing 3 months of education during whole COVID, you know. And one thing why it wasn't that huge, like in some other countries, that we repeated some tests which were actually not so much focused on the knowledge. It was used on these functional literacies, you know, in math, in reading, and so on. And the loss in these type of literacies wasn't that huge as we expected. And when you do curve, you know how there is a curve or some chart, how many months the school were closed and what was the learning loss. When you put it on the chart, our testing was that the learning loss wasn't that huge in the 5th grade as it should be because, you know, it was closed for 10 months and so on. But that was because we used tests which were focused on these functional literacies, you know, doing some math problems from the real world and reading things, which actually kind of shows that the Czech schools perhaps are not so much focused on this because the learning loss wasn't so big as we would expect, right? I mean, it maybe says something about the Czech schools, you know, that we focus on some formal, very formal types of knowledge and not on developing these skills. That's,
in fact, again, discussing the effectivity of our system, that we are not working with the feedback. John, you said that we should not really exploit the technologies, but we should focus on good educational concepts. That's what you said. But how can we recognize the good educational concept if we don't work with the feedback? If we don't realize that there is a data saying that something works well, something works less? What's your feedback? How do you use feedback in your concepts?
Well, I look at it from a policy perspective, more of a systems perspective. And from my perspective, at least with public education, that we're so afraid of failing that we don't try changing anything. And so what happens is that we all fail together is really the outcome in a weird way. I'm not a big proponent of private education, but I would like to see schools behave more like startups or operating in their own way, finding their own way, and trying these things out and sharing with each other experiences in a broader network. and not worrying so much about destroying kids' lives. Because right now everybody's going in together, but if we find ways to diversify what we do, maybe we can start finding ways. And I think that's really key. And how does a community define itself? How does a neighborhood define itself, right? How does a region define itself? I think that we can really start to attend to that as a much more complex system rather than something that's so tightly controlled and regulated.
Okay, thank you. If we look at the Czech situation, many parents are now looking for opportunities to get out of this mainstream system, because we see the Montessori concepts, we see other, let's say, more creative, more free concepts of education. How do you see this trend? Is it something you support, or what's your opinion on that, Daniel?
Well, there is some running study which does segments of parents. You know, this one is the creative thinker, this type of parents. And the point is that I don't think there is many. It's a mess, you know. Many parents don't care at all. Many parents have very contrary opinions about education. Many parents don't know what was going on in schools. There is educated parents which are focused on the performance, educated parents which are focused on this type of... So it's very hard to describe this field of parents. It's very diverse, and the opinions. So what I think is that... there was a big push to these long grammar schools, víceletá gymnázia, as the quality of the of the middle schools in Czech Republic is not so great. There was a big push to the víceletá gymnázia, and now I think many people who goes there from our data, when we ask the parents what was the motivation, there's a big part of parents, especially in the regions, where around 15-20% of the kids leave the normal schools. The parents says the main motivation is that they are afraid that the normal schools will get worse, you know. So I call it induction of demand, you know, that actually kids leaving kind of creates a demand that my kid has to leave too, because of course, you know, it will get much worse, the schools, after all the kids, all the clever kids from the middle class leaves, you know. So it's kind of continuing this demand for the víceletá gymnázia, and I don't think it's a problem in the majority of Czech Republic, but in the third of Czech Republic, it's a problem which are kind of destroying the main schools, but the motivations itself among younger educated parents are changing. They are not so focused on the performance, and they are focused on these modern things, like you said, Montessori or Hejného metoda and so on. 5 years ago, this method of teaching math was like refused by parents, you know, and now it's parents want it so much that it's even taught by people who doesn't understand it, you know. So it lacks quality after all, you know. So it's changing, and I think people who have kids in elementary schools, they have very different opinions than kids who have kids in, you know, 9th grade and so on. So it will change, and I think demand for these things will increase, and demand for this performance-based education will decrease, but we are keeping it up by this induction of demand, because we are afraid that your school will get worse, you know. So that's some inspiration what to work on. And of course, there's increasing number of private schools, which I don't know if you know it. They have some of them have almost 100% public financing, like public schools in Czech Republic. So one person came to Czech Republic and said, "You are only country who has Milton Friedman voucher system. You know, one of the countries which actually have it. You know, because it is actually almost voucher system in Czech Republic."
Okay, we are coming to the... I would like to also let the audience to ask a few questions at the end. But before we do it, if we want to have a change, and I feel from this discussion that we would like to have some change in the educational system, always any change starts with the first step. What would be your recommendation for the first step we should undertake? John?
You know, we're supposed to talk about budućnosti, right? nobody's been to the future, right? So nobody has the right answers. Not a single person in this room has the right answers. But I think together, I think that the room itself is smart enough. So what we need to do is enable the conditions in which we can find the answers to all this together. And that's the first step, is to enable it.
Thank you. Daniel, what's your opinion about the first step?
I don't know the first step, which sounds boring, but I think it's a precondition for any change in Czech education, is to change managing of Czech schools. We have around 4,000 schools, elementary and middle schools, which are run by 2,000 municipalities, and nobody is responsible for the quality. Nobody actually manage the system, and the financing doesn't help the schools which are operating in poor areas and needs this money for psychologists, some better teachers and so on. So change the managing and financing of Czech schools to make it more transparent and make it help schools which actually needs to cope with the social problems in the regions and so on. And I think that's why any other change is impossible, because we don't have that, and it from I talked about the Krnov example, which is one of the very few examples of desegregation in Czech education system. And Mr. Handlíř, who is the director of Krnov, who is my personal hero, they managed to desegregate it without losing the quality of education. And there's 8% of Roma kids. But he still tells us that it's so hard to implement these programs on all the schools, so you don't have this competing, that they would say, okay, you do so much for the Roma kids, they will go to your school, And there is this bad competition that when you focus on helping kids from, not only Roma, but kids from Ukraine and kids from poor background, that you are actually punished for it. Because, in Czech education, when nobody manages it, the kids are sent to your school. And until we change this, any of this, regional pilots, and piloting something in one school and so on, doesn't help, because it doesn't get through the system to the majority of the schools. So that's, I think, which I would change, the managing of the schools.
To change the financing of schools could be also a big barrier for these managers of schools, because they might be satisfied with the way they get financed now. If you talk with any director of the schools, they are overwhelmed with the financing. They are running 8-10 European fund programs. They are asking for money every year for the social psychologist. So they cannot even hire psychologists or some type of teachers, because they cannot promise them that they will stay on the school for the next 5 years. It's horribly fragmented and administratively. It's administrative hell, the financing of Czech schools, and it needs to be changed to do some change in the content, for example. Well, I'm talking about the change of financing of also universities, right, based on the added value, and the biggest barrier at the end, which I found over the last 10 years, is in the academic field. They don't want to have this change. But anyway, we are coming to the end of the session, and I would like to ask the audience if they have some questions which you can answer. We can use the presence of 2 experts in Ostrava, so please feel free if anybody has a question.
So Daniel and I will be at the festival the next 2 days too. So you can find us and find a way to spark some smarter conversations around the festival too. That's the whole point.
Okay, so there are no questions, so I would like to maybe ask for the last sentence first, John.
Hi.
What's your dream about the future?
I think a dream about the future is that we've got kids and families who really get excited and love going to school. Sharing new knowledge with each other. We've got communities working together in smart ways. That's really my dream.
Thank you. Daniel, your last dream expression?
I would say I'm very hopeful for the young generation because sometimes they come to me and they talk about a book from my colleagues or the book I wrote, you know, and they have so much understanding for the problems in Czech society, which I would, I didn't have until I was 30 or something like that, you know, and I could only dream of being so educated and understanding the social problems and the problems in education, which some of these kids have when they are on high school, you know. So that makes me hopeful that it's actually much better than when I was in high school. This understanding of the problems of the society.
Anyway, thank you both, gentlemen, for your dreams, for your wishes to change the educational system. I follow your dream. I'm looking forward to when the financing system will be changed in the Czech Republic. I'm also a little bit skeptical about this because I'm talking about it for maybe 15 years now and I don't see really big changes, and my personal experiences are that the directors of school are under such a big pressure that even bad students are not expelled because they would be missing money which they get for these bad students. And I had one employee and he was not even able after the gymnasium to write a proposal. He was making grammar failures, and I watched his exams, the maturitní vysvědčení, and he had number 2 in Czech language, which is the second best because you have it different in the United States. And I called the director, why this guy who is writing now Bujka, he's having number 2 at the exam at Maturita. And the director told me, well, if I would expel him, I would lose 40,000 per semester. So, and he's dyslexic, so he is entitled to have better exam because of that. So I hope that the pilots are not dyslexic in many fields. I hope that they had the exams according to their real knowledge, and they don't have just formal tests, but they have the tests of their real knowledge. So once more, thank you. Thank you all for listening to us. So I think we should thank also to our 2 guests who arrived from Prague and from the US to Ostrava.
Thank you.